So this is like the, what do you call that, Canadian Idol kind of? Just waiting for Simon to say something bad.
Yeah.
Cette semaine, j'ai la chance de m'entretenir avec Maloose, auteur et porte-parole du cercle Two-Spirit de Montréal autochtone.
Maloose, welcome on my set. I'm very thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. My first question for you is about the book that you wrote that is called The Fragments, right? What made you want to write the book?
Fragments is actually a collection of short stories that I have kept for about 20 years. Most of them I wrote during high school and college years. Half of them contain LGBTQ2 themes, okay. Issues that face the community, such as sexual violence, lateral violence, physical violence, homophobia, grief, things that people don't want to talk about generally. So that I just put them out. Okay. So that was my mode of writing back then. I didn't really want to write a book back then. It was just to express myself, to release what I have seen, what I've heard, what's happening in my own communities. So that was the purpose of those short stories. And a couple of years ago, 2 years maybe, I contacted a publisher. It was more or less to make my life known. I was in process of writing my autobiography, and that was my intent to get it published. But I didn't know that it's only famous people who can publish their
autobiography. Yeah.
So I still continued on writing it, but at that time I was going through difficulties in my life. I really had trouble living day by day.
Okay.
And I kind of strayed away from my writing, and the publisher kept contacting me, kept asking me for my script. So I just sent in my short stories. I sent in 20, but afterwards I just took off 5 of them, so 15 were published.
Like you're saying that these are things that we don't really talk about, that you've heard of, that happens in your community, right? Why do you think it's so important to give a voice to those stories?
Well, because it's time to talk about LGBTQ2 matters, two-spirited matters in our communities, because it's always been taboo in the past, or things that people generally would just shy away from. And I think that it's best that we keep talking about it, keep a dialogue, a positive dialogue about these matters, and that's the only way we can heal from the hurt that the two-spirited people experience.
Mm-hmm. When you say positive dialogue, you mean like you write stories that are more about empowerment, resilience, or is it still more darker stories?
These short stories contain somber or dark endings or tragic endings, but these things need to be discussed. That's the only way we can heal, because that's the way I was able to release myself, to actually get away the dark stuff that I've seen or heard happen.
Was it hard to write those short stories for you?
At the beginning, when I started writing them, I would sit in front of the computer. They just come out freely. It's like a natural process, natural way to get rid of my emotions, personal things that kept blocking me.
Yeah, it seems like they had to get out, actually. It feels like...
Yes, and afterwards, it didn't really seem like it was a difficult time after actually releasing them. It felt relief. I felt relieved. And I think that people who will read these, who will relate to this, will feel the same way.
Okay, great. And on another note, you're doing your autobiography as well?
I started doing my autobiography 3 years ago, around that time. And it was during the time when I had to reflect on my life, because that time I didn't really have something going for me. I was on a downturn, a major downturn in my life. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know what I was going to do. I lived with my cousin, moved in with my cousin and his wife and their family. They allowed me to live in their basement for a couple of years, mainly because at that time I left work. I lost my place, mainly because of alcoholism. I was suicidal during that time. I was in and out of psychiatry, and I had a suicide attempt. I took painkillers. I overdosed, and I was in a hospital for a couple of days, sleeping. Mm-hmm. But when I woke up, they sent me to a rehab center, and that's when I started thinking, because I was still suicidal even after these therapies. And I was thinking, what am I leaving behind to the world? Mm-hmm. I didn't see anything. So I just wanted people to know who I am, who I was. So I started writing my autobiography. And the psychiatrists, the psychologists that I have seen, there were many of them. They were first encouraging me to continue writing, but once they figured out that it was actually my suicide note, they just neutralized my emotions. They gave me a very strong medication to neutralize my emotions. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad.
You were just neutral.
Mm-hmm. When somebody died,
you're numb. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When somebody died, I just didn't feel anything. When a child was born, I didn't feel anything.
Wow.
So that's how severe it was. So I put aside that project and started on Fragments instead. Actually, the way it happened was, while I was writing my autobiography, I contacted the publisher, and they kept asking for a script, for my manuscript, and I couldn't provide them with the autobiography because I didn't feel it was complete. So I couldn't even write. That's how severe my emotions were neutralized. So I just sent in the short stories that I had already written. So that's how it started. So even then, the Fragments was done by accident.
Okay. And when did you get to feel again?
When I understood that the medication was actually neutralizing my emotions, I just stopped taking them without even telling the doctors. So it took me a while to actually go back to my real emotions.
Okay. And when your emotions came back, what happened to the suicidal thoughts? Did they go away, or are they still there?
My suicidal thoughts actually continued while I was still drinking.
Yeah.
But then I realized that I had to go back because I had relapsed from the time I was sent to rehab. So I had to go back to rehab, the same place, but this time on my own recognizance, at my own choice.
Yes.
No one telling me what to do. No one actually forcing me to go there. It was my choice to go there.
Choosing to go there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's been 2 years and a half now that I've been sobered.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. And since then, I realized that I had a lot of things that I had to take care of personally with my emotions, and I had to deal with them, and I had to deal with them positively, and I was able to do it even though it was very difficult. And that's how I was able to be strong enough to go public with this, because I know if I were still actively an alcoholic, I think I wouldn't have been able to have this much strength to actually proceed with all of what I've been doing for the past year and a half.
I'd like to talk a bit about what is the Two-Spirit identity, because I think when we non-native people try to talk about it, we perceive it more as like a kind of non-binary identity. With a bit of research, I realized that it's a lot broader than that. So would you like to tell me a bit more about what it is actually?
Two-Spirit was actually a term that was reclaimed back in 1990 in Winnipeg. A group of Two-Spirit people from across North America gathered, and they wanted to have an identity, a sense of belonging. So they reclaimed the title Two-Spirited because it had existed back before European contact. Two-Spirited people were regarded as valued people. They were educators, caregivers for children. There were parents for orphan children.
Okay.
And they were medicine people, healers. And that's what their main roles were. And since the Europeans came in with the biblical teachings, the Two-Spirited people started fading away. And in 1990...
So they went from being like honored and respected to being marginalized and treated as not normal.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's how it went. Back in 1990, the title Two-Spirit was reclaimed, and it's still trying to create awareness across Canada. Even a lot of First Nations people, Indigenous people, do not even understand the term Two-Spirited people. But now we're trying to, it's been broadened to include the LGBTQ2 people who identify themselves as that. So those who identify as Two-Spirited people, they both have the male and female spirits.
Okay.
Whether a person is a female or a male, both.
So it's not, so you can be a man but still have both spirits.
Both female and gender, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you said that before in the Native community they were respected and even honored, and they were healers and leaders, but today how are the Two-Spirit community perceived in your community?
In the Cree Nation of USG, it's not really something that's talked about. People are frowned who identify themselves as a Two-Spirited and who identify themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, for that matter. The difficulties that we've had, because I have to experience it myself as well, is that we seldom get promotions at the workplace. We get passed by other people, even though we have more experience or more competence than the other candidate, especially those who are open with their own sexuality. And now it's starting to change. It's a little progress.
Okay. So you're saying basically there is a lot of homophobia in the Native community towards Two-Spirit people, right? It's not perceived as something that was as positive. Can I say that?
Homophobia is very high, yes. Mainly because people are not aware, are not clearly aware of what a Two-Spirited person is. So a Two-Spirited person is really just like somebody that was created by Hollywood. That's the picture that people think of. Like RuPaul that's the only person who is gay, who's supposed to be gay. Mm-hmm. So we're all supposed to be divas, but that's not the case. We are also part of the community.
Okay, you're saying that there's not a lot of role models out there to know what is a person that is Two-Spirit. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's clearly what it is. We don't really have role models who have identified themselves openly as Two-Spirited people. Yeah. But we do have role models who are Two-Spirited people, but who do not clearly open.
And speaking about that, you recently organized like a big conference event, right? Can you tell me a bit more about this event?
The Two-Spirit Conference is actually organized annually. It was done 7 years in a row by my own community. Late Jane Gunner Blacksmith, she was the one who started this. She has a son who's Two-Spirited, who identifies himself as a Two-Spirited man. Okay. And what she did at that time, before starting this, organizing the conference, was she sent her son to a psychologist to make him straight.
So conversion therapy.
Yeah, conversion therapy. But the thing was, that psychologist empowered her son to accept himself even more. So her plan didn't work. Yeah. And what happened was, she in turn had the same psychologist, and that psychologist turned her mindset and to accept her son the way he actually is. Wow. So once he saw that her son was having a lot of discrimination and difficulties living in the communities, so Jane Gunner Blacksmith organized the Two-Spirit Conference for other Two-Spirited people to not get marginalized or discriminated the way her son has been marginalized and discriminated. Yeah. So she wanted to empower other Two-Spirited people. But it was done in a discreet fashion. For the first 2 years, I didn't even know it existed, me as a Two-Spirited man from my local community. And because it was done so discreetly. But the third year it was done, that's when I participated. That's how I was able to get my empowerment to accept myself as a Two-Spirited man. That's how I learned the history of the Two-Spirited people. And just this past year, I was asked to coordinate the Two-Spirited Conference. It was by accident. Because, yeah, it was by accident because the person who did it who initially was supposed to do it was on medical leave. I accepted without hesitation, but the only difference I did was I made it public. The Two-Spirit conference came out of the closet, if you will.
Okay, wow.
So I publicized it in the media. I went to the radio, local radios, and spoke about it. And I even invited our political leaders to join our conference and to accept and stand with us.
Okay. So, am I wrong to say that you like to break taboos, the way I'm seeing it? Is that something?
Well, to be honest, I never knew I actually even had that quality, if you will, but that's what people say.
Yeah, you have a lot of strength, definitely.
Well, I'd have to say that the strength comes in from people actually empowering me. It's not really me that's doing this. I've actually started doing this because of what I've seen in those past conferences happen, because it needs to continue. I didn't do this for my own sake. I didn't do this for my publicity. I didn't do this to advance myself. I wanted to do this for that 5-year-old who's having trouble to identify himself or herself in the communities, and I'm doing this for that parent who's been discriminated just because he or she is a two-spirited person in the communities. So that's, I'm not really doing this for me, I'm doing this for others, so that this can continue to bring awareness.
So you say there aren't a lot of role models and not a lot of people that are publicly out and speaking about it. So do you feel kind of alone carrying that mission of doing that?
It's something that just recently started to sink in, that people are actually considering me as a role model in the Two-Spirit community. But it's something that I take seriously, but it's something that I don't really want to be considered as, but it's just something that comes along with what I'm doing, trying to help the community. I try to do this positively. I try to stay away from negative matters, negative people as well. And I do want to incorporate and welcome in other Two-Spirited people into the line of work of what I'm doing. However, they stray away from what I'm doing, because they don't want to be either labeled as a Two-Spirited person, or they don't want to be identified as a Two-Spirited person. It's something that scares them. Because I know what I'm doing is scary. Because I've been doing this just recently, but I've been a gay man. I always identified myself as a gay man rather than a Two-Spirited person in the past. And in the communities is something that nobody wants to be identified as, because of the name calling, the prejudice that exists. Even family members do not really accept homosexual family members.
So I guess you're trying to destigmatize the identity as much as you can by informing the community.
Yes, and what I'm doing my best is actually to empower other Two-Spirited people. But it's very difficult to do that, because they themselves need to understand who they are first. Yeah. And it's through these conferences, through certain experiences of mine that I've encountered as well, that will be able to enable them to identify themselves.
And then after to be proud instead of ashamed of being Two-Spirit as well.
That was my experience as well, because I always told myself I'm not ashamed of myself, but in reality I was. I always accepted myself as a gay man. It was at the age of 16 I told my parents while I was drunk. I wouldn't have been able to do it if I were sober. And they weren't too happy with it, and they weren't that sad with it either, but they were just shocked, if you will. They just sent me to bed. And after that, it was something that was never talked about. They knew that I was a gay man, a gay son. They had a gay son. Yeah. And I told my siblings once they were mature enough to understand what a gay person is. I didn't tell my 4-year-old sister, I'm a gay man, look at me. I waited until she was in her teens. Okay. So it's with my personal experience, that's how I know what the current Two-Spirited people in the communities are facing. Because I had to get away from the community for me to actually empower myself.
And with that empowering being done, can you say you're proud of being Two-Spirited today?
Pride is something that's very difficult for me to actually acknowledge, mainly because I have a mental disorder called dysthymia. Dysthymia means someone who rarely appreciates himself or herself.
Yeah.
Someone who fails to see success. So that's what I've seen all throughout my life.
Okay.
I've never really been proud of myself with any accomplishments that I've made. So to actually open up as one of the few two-spirited people in my community, am I proud of that? It's something that I think for people who say that I'm proud is because I'm open. But I'd have to say that it was something that was very difficult for me to do. It was something that I did overnight, even though it seems like it was overnight. Yeah. But, so pride is not something that that's not very easy for me to say.
Or to feel, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to ask you about your most recent projects. What have you been working on, actually?
Since the Two-Spirited Conference became public, people started to become aware of what it was. So people started contacting me. Mm-hmm. And I was contacted by the Fragments du Québec that there was an event by Native Montreal. They called it the LGBTI Initiative. And they had a get-together, and I went there. It was a group of two-spirited people living in and around Montreal, and they were trying to organize a sense of belonging, a place where they can meet and socialize. And I participated every so often in those events, but nobody wanted to take charge. So I just went in there, I just took charge of the circle, but we renamed it to Two-Spirited Circle of Montreal rather than the LGBTI initiative that was initially called. And it's still a slow process, but we still have to try to see where it's going, because we need to have a vision, and there is nobody who's a leader. It's a circle, everyone is the same, so that's why I am a spokesperson rather than a leader or president of any high-level title. And because of the Two-Spirited Circle of Montreal, people from out west, Two-Spirited people from out west heard of this group. And what they've done was 10 years ago, they organized a forum where they wanted to create a Canada-wide council of two-spirited people. But it was never done because of Harper years. The Conservative government never really funded this initiative. But it's just recently that these members from 10 years ago revived this concept. So they came to Montreal and told us their vision and everything. So in May, I will go to Edmonton to help out with the creation of the Canada-wide Two-Spirited Council.
Make this national thing happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. You're extremely inspiring, Maloose. Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy that I had you here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.